IndyCar burns the midnight oil, and we had yet another good finish in the Cup race. Been getting a lot of those lately. So let's get into it. This is the fuel. What is happening, ladies and germs? This is the PackerMan, and welcome to today's edition of The Fuel, our 20th episode. Yay! But we got some stuff to go over today. But before we get into the race reviews, there is a few news articles that we need to talk about. Or some things over the weekend that we have to talk about. So let's go ahead and knock those out first. So a little bit of a funny story here. We all know Hailie Deegan as perhaps one of the next big rising stars of NASCAR. Well, her birthday was just this past week, and a funny little thing happened. Apparently when she tried to change her age on her Twitter account, for some reason Twitter, I don't know if it was like a bot or something like that, but it locked her out of her Twitter account. And it actually led to a lot of people speculating that she deleted her Twitter account because, you know, she turned 18 this past week, and that means all the creepers are out. No, it was just Twitter being stupid. But she did eventually get her Twitter back up, so all was well and good. At least in her camp. But, on a bit of a sad note, though, and this especially sucks, considering that this guy was actually on top of the pit box yesterday, which is even more crazy. Nick Harrison, crew chief for the 11 car of College Racing in the Xfinity Series. He died yesterday evening at the age of 37. At the time that I'm recording this, they didn't really have anything to say, you know, what he died from or anything like that, because I mean, he was on top of the pit box yesterday. That's the crazy thing about it, is the fact that he was on top of the pit box yesterday, crew chiefing for Justin Haley, and then a couple hours later he's gone. I mean, that's how crazy life can be sometimes. You could be here 1 minute and then gone the next. I mean, it's insane. Yeah, they still haven't given any cause to exactly what might have happened. It might have been an underlying condition that he didn't know about, like, say, you know, a blood clot, or, you know, an aneurysm that hadn't, you know, exploded yet, or anything like that, of that nature, or it could have been a heart attack. We don't know. But regardless of what the cause may have been, this sucks. I mean, as a race fan, you know, it sucks when a driver gets killed, you know, on the racetrack, but when something like this happens, you know, another crew member, it sucks just as much, to be honest, because they're just as big a part of, you know, the race team, you know, as the driver is, and anyone else is. You know, and there were a lot of drivers and crew members that expressed their condolences, and I honestly can't imagine what Justin Haley's going through. I mean, what a wild month of July he has had. Such a roller coaster ride. 4th of July weekend, he's on top of the world, you know, scoring the massive upset victory at Daytona, and then barely 2.5 weeks later he loses his Xfinity crew chief. And College Racing, of course, released a statement, and just a very, very sad deal, to be honest, and it certainly put a damper on the entire weekend in the racing community. So thoughts and prayers are certainly with the Harrison family at this point. That's just crazy. But yeah, great thing that New Hampshire Motor Speedway did. And they actually announced his passing at the drivers' meeting, and then held a pre-race moment of silence for him. Like I said, no cause of death has been given yet, and funeral services haven't been announced yet, but I'm pretty sure those will be coming in due time. That just sucks, man. Alright, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into our race reviews. First up, the IndyCar Series. The 2019 Iowa 300 at the Iowa Speedway, which is really starting to show its age. I don't think it's been repaved since the track was built, and it's really starting to become a bumpy track. The drivers initially expressed concern about the start time, especially with the heat and the way that where the sun is and stuff like that. You know, basically going into the turns that we where the sun is located, they would basically be going into like the corner blind, which is not exactly ideal when you're going almost 200 miles an hour in an IndyCar. But the race was actually delayed by a massive rainstorm, and I mean massive. There was like sheets of rain just coming down onto the racetrack, and it delayed the race by about 4 hours. And it was past 11 o'clock p.m. on the East Coast by the time they got the race started in Iowa. And this race was basically burning the midnight oil. It actually went past midnight, but they were bound and determined to get this race in. And it was actually a somewhat decent race, all things considered. So Simon Pagenaud starts from the pole after a 4-hour rain delay. Will Power goes around the outside and leads lap 1. Takuma Sato uses the same move to pass Pagenaud for second, so he looked good early on. Pagenaud gets back by Sato for second on lap 11, and then Newgarden gets by Sato for third. And then we have our first caution on lap 16. Sage Karam spins off the turn 4, and Felix Rosenqvist gets into Karam and damages the front wing on both cars, so they both had to come in and get both front wings repaired. Some cars come in for service on pit road, so Power leads on the restart. Newgarden gets by Pagenaud for second, so we have a Team Penske 1, 2, 3 on lap 26, and that's what it basically looked for most of the race. Dixon actually started dropping back early on. I mean, let's be completely honest here, Dixon was garbage in this race. But I tell you what, the amount of luck he has sometimes is just staggering, and we'll get to that here in a little bit. Power with a 2-second lead on lap 36, but Newgarden would actually chase him down, and we had our one and only pure lead change, I believe. Yep, our one and only pure lead change of the race on lap 46, when Newgarden got by Power in amongst some lap cars. Our second caution on lap 50 was for rain. And at this point, I'm like, fuck Mother Nature. So they had to red flag the race on lap 54 for some weather that came in. And they actually had to wait for about half an hour, got the track dried up, and got back under caution. Field comes in for service, and Newgarden leads on the restart, and that's Newgarden pretty much led from there. I mean, he absolutely dominated this race. I think he led like 245 of the 300 laps, which is not the first time he's completely dominated this race. Sato goes by Alexander Rossi on the restart for fourth. Rossi and Santino Ferrucci battling for the fifth position at this point. Power was maintaining the gap to Newgarden for the lead, so even though Newgarden dominated this race, Power was basically his closest competition for much of it. Rossi and Ferrucci start catching Sato, while Hinchcliffe was catching them all, so we had a great battle for position here. inside the top 5. Rossi and Ferrucci both get by Sato for 4th and 5th. The handling on Sato's car started to fade a little bit, so they're going to actually do a bit of a strategy call, which actually works out pretty good for them for a little while anyway. Newgarden and Power pull out a 10-second gap on everybody else. They're just far away from everybody else. So this is when a large majority of the field really started getting lapped. So the battle for the lead starts heating up amongst the lap cars as Power tries to get back around his teammate. Rossi finally gets by Ferrucci for 4th. And then Takuma Sato kicks off green flag stops on lap 121. And it would be quite a while before other people would come in. But Sato pretty much proved that fresh tires were king, because he was 12 miles an hour faster on new tires than the leader at that point on old tires. So that pretty much tells you that fresh tires make you look like Superman. And that actually worked to Sato's advantage on this run. Scott Dixon legitimately goes a lap down on lap 122, and I'm just like, wow. I mean, Dixon is just absolutely struggling at this point. He struggled for much of this race. So like I said, 12 miles an hour faster Sato was on fresh tires. Pagenaud pits on lap 137, and that really begins the rush to pit road. Newgarden pits from the lead on lap 143, and Newgarden cycles back with the lead, and Sato cycles back up to second. Evidently that early stop, made him so fast that it actually got him all the way back up to the runner-up spot, which is crazy. And at this point, there are only 9 cars left on the lead lap at the halfway point of the race. So Newgarden was setting an absolutely blistering pace. I mean, the parity between all the cars was evident. I mean, of course, you had the Penske guys that were fast all weekend long, and they were just absolutely dominating. But there was no question that Newgarden, I mean, the speed they had in that car was just crazy. Power gets back by Sato for second, as Sato's now on much older tires than the rest of the field is at this point, but it was still a good move for him because it moved him back up towards the front of the field. And with the field as spread out as it was, he stood less of a chance of falling back to the field position-wise than he did before. Power begins catching Newgarden back down as Newgarden gets trapped by the cars of Matheus Leist and Santino Ferrucci going a lap down. Pagenaud goes up the track in turn 2, basically gets out of the groove but manages to save the car. At this point, 4th on down is more than 14 seconds back, so that just goes to show you how fast that 2 car was. Back at the front, Power begins putting the pressure on Newgarden once again. I mean, Power is basically the only one who can keep up with Newgarden at this point. And Alexander Rossi was actually in danger of being lapped by Newgarden, which is pretty crazy to say. Sato kicks off the next round of pit stops on lap 180, same deal. And then at this point, Marco Andretti was being warned that they were not meeting minimum speed. I mean, and Marco Andretti's just had a really crappy year at this point. Then we get our third caution on lap 187. Sato gets run over by Sage Karam after Sato checked up in turn 4. Will Power went up the track in turn 4. Sato was right there, and he basically had to check up, and Sage Karam basically ran into the back of him. So that pretty much ruined Sato's race. I mean, he had the potential to actually get a good finish with this strategy. But of course, the guy who doesn't run every week decides to, be an idiot. The remaining cars on the lead lap come in for service. There weren't that many at this point. Newgarden leads on the restart. Had a big gaggle of cars in turns 3 and 4, going like 3 and 4 wide. But somehow everybody keeps it clean, which was surprising. Pagenaud gets by Spencer Pigot for the 3rd position, so Spencer Pigot actually had a good race in this race. Oh, and by the way, on that restart with all that gaggle of cars, Santino Ferrucci passed 7 cars in one corner on the restart. which is crazy. I mean, he ended up finishing 11th, but that's not indicative of how many cars he passed in this race. And honestly, he deserved a better finish than 11th. IndyCar penalized Sage Karam for avoidable contact, but he opts to just park it instead because it's too much damage to the car anyway. At this point, Marco is just slower than molasses, and I'm just going to go ahead and say it. That 98 team is trash. They've been trash all year, and that's a teammate to Alexander Rossi, you know, who's a championship contender. So what the hell's going on over there? Unreal. And he retires the car on lap 205 due to ill handling issues. So they have got a lot of work to do on that 98 team. I mean, they just need to upend that entire team and just start fresh, because what they're doing over there is obviously not working. And Sato retires from the race at lap 224 due to damage from that earlier wreck. Newgarden has a 3.5 second lead with 70 laps to go. Green flag pit stops begin on lap 251. Newgarden pits from the lead on lap 254, and he cycles back with the lead on lap 259. Will Power nearly bends it into the end of the pit wall because he was trying to really hustle it to the entrance of pit lane, but has to check up to avoid hitting the end of the pit wall and loses second to Pagano as a result. But as it turned out, he went over the two white lines that were right before the pit lane, and Power was penalized for an improper pit entry. So Power has not won this year, and even though he's been fast at a lot of races, just these mental issues and mental mistakes have basically cost him a shot to win all year long, and he's in danger of losing his consecutive win streak. I mean, he's won every single year he's been in IndyCar, and Champ Car for that matter, since he debuted in like 2007. So that streak is in danger at this point. And then the fourth caution came out, I believe it's the fourth and final caution, came out on lap 264. Ed Carpenter spins on his own in turn 2 and smashes the wall, ending his day, which kind of sucks because he was actually in the top 5. And here's the part where Scott Dixon became one of the luckiest guys of this entire, well, actually the luckiest guy of this entire race, because Dixon has been completely and utter trash this entire race. You know, spending the entire race, almost the entire race, a lap down in like 17th position, and they just can't get that car fixed. And they decide to stay out longer than most people on this run, and actually catches the frickin' caution. Like, are you kidding me at this point? So Dixon never pits, and the caution is a huge break for him. He remains on the lead lap, and of course, once again, there are not very many cars on the lead lap at this point. Graham Rahal reports flames coming out of the left side headers, so they thought they had a broken header at this point. So several drivers come in for fresh rubber, including Dixon. Newgarden decides to stay out though and leads on the restart. Rossi begins flying through the field on fresh tires. Hinchcliffe moves up to second past Pagano. Colton Herta has to retire from the race with an engine issue. So once again out of the race, but again something not of his own doing. And then Scott Dixon now begins challenging and actually passes Pagano for third. And at this point, a lot of people were like, if he actually wins this race, then it's just like, what the hell, man? And I'll be honest here, if he would have won this race, I mean, yeah, you know, he managed to get lucky, but that's really all it was. I mean, I don't feel like he would have earned that win, you know, based on the fact that he was trash all day, and then he catches a lucky break with a caution, and if he would have won this race, I've been like, yeah, that was just complete luck sauce. Didn't win the race, but he still got on the podium though. Dixon moves into second past Hinchcliffe. And before that last caution, he was a lap down and 17th for almost 2/3 of this race. Hinchcliffe starts closing back in on Dixon for second with 6 laps to go, but wasn't able to catch him at the end of the day. And Joseph Newgarden dominates the Iowa 300 for his 4th win of the year. And God damn it. As I was saying, Joseph Newgarden dominates and wins the Iowa 300 for his 4th win of the year and pads his championship lead. Scott Dixon comes back to finish second, and Hinchcliffe comes home in third to round out the podium. Okay, so unofficial results should show up on screen right now. Top 11 finishers. Of course, Newgarden, the winner, Scott Dixon, the luckiest second place he's ever had in his entire career. I'll just say that. Hinchcliffe comes home in third. He was the defending winner of this race, and he showed that he was good again. Simon Pagenaud, pole sitter, comes home 4th. Spencer Pigot, top 5, so he keeps Ed Carpenter's top 5 streak intact here at Iowa. Alexander Rossi 6th. Zach Veach with a 7th place finish. Very quiet in this race, but stayed out of trouble and ended with a 7th place finish. Graham Rahal, despite that broken header issue, comes home in 8th. Sebastian Bourdais in 9th. Oh, by the way, Zach Veach was the last car in the lead lap. So only 7 cars finished on the lead lap in this race. And Tony Kanaan gets a top 10 finish for AJ Foyt Motorsports after pretty much struggling the entire year. That's pretty crazy. So, the point standings. With 5 races remaining in the season, Joseph Newgarden with 5 races remaining in the season, not much has changed other than Sebastian Bourdais moving up into the 10th position. But other than that, the championship standings are the same as last week, except now Newgarden has a 29-point advantage over Alexander Rossi. Simon Pagenaud third, 58 points back. Scott Dixon, he's still 98 points out of the lead, but I mean, honestly, his run at the championship this year could have been over after this race, considering how terrible he ran the entire night, and a little bit of luck possibly saved his shot at the championship. Of course, he's still going to have to improve over the next couple races if he wants to keep himself championship eligible. But Newgarden, I mean, he has a 29-point advantage now, but as we've seen in the past, under this point system, no championship lead is safe. And due to the fact that Laguna Seca is a double points race, this championship's not over yet, not by a long shot. So, 5 races to go in the IndyCar Series season, this championship is still pretty much up for grabs. As for my final rating for this race, it was pretty at times, but it was alright. I mean, despite everything that happened, it was still pretty enjoyable. I'll give this race a 5.25 out of 10. It was alright. So let's go ahead and move into the Cup Series review. Alright, so let's go ahead and get into the 2019 Foxwoods Casino Resort 301 at New Hampshire, which was actually pretty solid. So stages 1 and 2 were 75 laps, stage 3 151 laps, so pretty good split. Brad Keselowski starts the race from the pole position, but Kyle Busch gets around Keselowski and leads lap 1. Kyle Busch was pretty dominant in the first part of the race. Several cars who had to start at the rear of the field after going to backup cars due to like mechanical failures and crashes in practice were coming towards the front in a hurry. Guys like Alex Bowman and Kyle Larson and guys of that nature. We had the status quo Penske versus Gibbs battle at the front of the field. It was 3 Gibbs cars, which was Kyle Busch, Denny Hamlin, and Truex against the lone Penske of Keselowski, at least at the time. Keselowski starts closing back in on Kyle for the race lead. I'll take a look at my notes here. Yeah, okay. Keselowski challenges for the lead on lap 35, and he takes it from Kyle in turn 3, but Kyle does the crossover move. Next week I'm doing this review in the fucking car. Fuck this shit. Anyway, Keselowski takes the lead from Kyle in turn 3, but Kyle crossed back under and was able to lead at the line barely. But because Keselowski had the high side, he was able to retake the lead after starting from the pole. And we had our one and only pure lead change of the day. Yes, you heard me correctly. It was by Brad Keselowski on lap 37. So much like the IndyCar race, only one pure lead change the entire day. Of course, it wasn't really indicative of how decent this race was, actually. Truex passes Kyle for second and begins challenging Keselowski for the lead. There was lots of lap traffic for the leaders as well. But then we get our first caution on lap 46. Austin Dillon loses a right front tire and pounds the turn 4 wall hard, although they were able to make repairs and continue. Everyone comes in for service. Eric Jones takes just 2 tires and wins the race off pit road. So track position was, as usual at New Hampshire, very, very important. So Jones leads on the restart. Stenhouse does not get a good restart because he started on the inside of Jones. Kyle Busch retakes the lead on the restart, though, again on the outside, which was kind of a common thing in the early part of this race. The SHR cars of Almirola, Boyer, and Harvick start making their presence felt in the top 5. Suarez gets into Stenhouse and almost loses the car. Kyle Larson has to make an unscheduled stop for a loose right rear wheel with 7 to go in stage 1, so tough break for him. Austin Dillon has another right front tire go down, but he keeps it off the wall this time. Truex, Harvick, Blaney, and Hamlin are fighting hard for the 6th position. So there was actually a lot of good battles in the middle portion of the top 10 a lot of times, even if the battle for the lead was non-existent for most of the race. And Kyle Busch wins stage 1 handily. But it was an alright first stage for the most part. Everyone comes in for service, and Kyle Busch wins the race off pit road with just 2 tires. But now we come to the weakest point of this race, stage number 2. This stage was garbage. Kyle Busch leads the start of stage 2. For the most part, this stage was a caution fest, and in between the cautions there wasn't really a whole lot going on. The 4 drivers who took just 2 tires, namely the Busch brothers, Truex and Keselowski, were still in positions 1 through 4 at lap 100. We have our second caution on lap 110, and it's the meeting of the Daniels, as Daniel Suarez pushes up in turn 1 and gets into Daniel Hemrick, which turns both cars around. Hemrick goes hard into the wall, although they did show a little bit later that the reason that might have happened was because in front of them Chase Elliott actually has something go wrong with his car. Reports were that it might have been, a water pump belt failure, which would also happen to another teammate of his, which we'll get to in a bit. And there was actually some water that got onto the racetrack, and that caused Suarez to actually lose grip and push up into Hemrick. So there's usually more to the story than what we initially see, and thank God for the replays, because that was pretty crazy. And Jones and so everyone comes in for service. There were a lot of 2 tire stops. Of course, Chase Elliott with his mechanical issues, while Jones and Bowman make contact on pit road, which forced Jones to return and make repairs, although he would recover from this. Harvick stays out and leads on the restart, but much like before, Kyle Busch gets a great jump and takes the lead once again on the restart. So we had some lead changes. There were 14 in all. It's just that some of them were on the restart and during pit stops, and people staying out and inheriting the lead due to pit stops. So only one true on-track pass today, which kind of sucks. But again, not totally indicative of what happened in this race. Hamlin, Keselowski, Bowyer, and Truex are fighting hard for the 4th position on lap 123. Then we get our 3rd caution on lap 137. Ricky Stenhouse Jr. blows a left front tire after contact with Eric Jones, and he hits the turn 2 wall hard. I mean, that was a hard lick. Thank God the safer barriers were there, and that puts Stenhouse Jr. out of the race. A lot of the field comes in for service at this point. Almirola decides to stay out and leads on the restart, and then we immediately get our 4th caution on lap 145. It looked like Clint Bowyer tried to move in front of Truex off of turn 4 and wasn't quite clear of him, and puts himself and Truex into the wall. Truex was able to make repairs and continue, and actually got a top 10 finish, while Bowyer finished outside the top 20, I think. I'm just going to go ahead and say this right now. Clint Bowyer has been fucking trash this year. You know, and considering that Stewart-Haas has Cole Custer waiting in the wings, and considering how good Cole Custer has been in the Xfinity Series this year, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if Stewart-Haas Racing jettisons Bowyer from that 14 car and puts Cole Custer in for 2020. It would not surprise me in the least. Because I don't think Almirola is going anywhere, because he's still been pretty consistent. Suarez is just in his first year, and you know they're not getting rid of Harvick. So I think Clint Bowyer is going to be the odd man out. And I think this is also a contract year for him. So and I haven't really heard anything about whether or not they've actually re-signed him to a new contract or anything of that nature. So I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if SHR decides to jettison Bowyer at the end of this season. And let's be completely honest here, Bowyer is on the back half of his career. He's in his 40s now, which is kind of hard to believe. But yeah, trust me, I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if they jettison him for Cole Custer, because Custer proved down in the Xfinity Series he can run with the Cup boys. So don't be the least bit surprised if Custer is in Cup next year. And of course, he's probably going to be joined by Tyler Reddick and Christopher Bell, and all 3 of those guys have been dominating Xfinity this year, which is fine because it's the Xfinity regulars getting the job done. So Almirola leads on the restart with 2 laps left in stage 2, and he wins the stage. He gets a good restart and wins the stage, although there was a bit of controversy where he looked like he brake checked the field on this. I think it was on this restart. So, but NASCAR decided not to do anything. So, take that however you want. Very lackluster second stage. This stage sucked. Might as well go ahead and say it. I mean, filled with nothing but cautions and a lot of boring racing. I mean, there was some good stuff here and there, but other than that, stage 2 sucked. Might as well go ahead and say it. So only a few cars come in for service this time around, and including Almirola. And of course, Almirola is one of those guys trying to get into the playoff. He doesn't have a win yet, but he is accumulating a lot of points. I mean, he accumulated, I think, 18 stage points in this race, which is a pretty damn good amount. And he also won a stage, which is an extra playoff point. So, you know, that's good. That's a good strategy by Almirola. Got a lot of stage points, and I think he finished just either inside the top 10 or just outside it. So he picked up quite a bit of points today, which for him is pretty important because it keeps him well ahead of the 17th position. So we get to stage number 3, 151 laps, and Denny Hamlin stays out and leads the start of stage 3, and he would pretty much lead a large chunk of stage 3. Jimmy Johnson has a similar problem to Chase Elliott, and then he loses the water pump belt, which in turn knocked the power steering pump belt off, and that forced him to pit road, and he lost a lot of laps. And this actually puts him on the outside looking in, and that's going to be a big deal because with 6 races to go, Jimmy's in danger of not making the playoff for the first time since its inception back in 2004. And I'm talking about Chase and the current playoff format. He's made it every single year. which if you're counting at home, that's 15 straight years of being a championship contender. That's pretty crazy. It shows you how good he's been as long as he has. Kyle Busch coming back through the field. He actually got a tire rub at the end of stage 2, which necessitated him getting some repairs on. So that's why he was kind of back in the pack, and he was never really a factor again after that. We have a great battle from 6th through 10th between Eric Jones, Alex Bowman, who actually went through 2 cars this week. In qualifying, he broke the drivetrain broke on the car and basically tore the underside of it up. So they had to go to a backup car, and then he crashed that one in Saturday practice. So they had to put a race wrap on Jimmy Johnson's backup car and race that. But he was up inside the top 10 at this point, as was Matt DiBenedetto, who got a legitimate top 5 finish in this race. So DiBenedetto punching well above his weight in the equipment that he has. And you have Ryan Blaney and Kyle Busch included in that group as well. Chris Buescher had a pretty good run today. He was up in the top 10 for most of the day. I think he ended up 15th at the end of the day, but still, top 15s are pretty good for that team right now. Him and Ryan Blaney were battling for 6th on lap 193. Newman and Truex start fighting hard for the 13th position. That was actually a pretty good battle. Hamlin has a 1.5 second lead with 100 laps to go. And Newman actually starts reporting a possible engine issue on lap 212. He reported that he had a cylinder go down. Although they did actually go under the hood, and I think it was like a coil wire or something like that, something of that nature. But they were actually able to get that repaired, and the engine was back up to full song. So it's not very often that you see an engine repaired, in a race. So that was kind of impressive. The 5th caution of the day happens on lap 215, and it's Kyle Busch. He got up high in turn 1, looked like he got loose a little bit and smacks the wall, and that brings the caution out. Didn't hit it too terribly badly though, so they were able to get to pit road and get it fixed. Everyone comes in for service and 4 tires. It was pretty much 4 tires all the way around, and Hamlin wins the race off pit road. Basically, they were setting themselves up for possibly one more pit stop. So Hamlin leads on the restart, but immediately we get our 6th caution on lap 219. Kyle Larson takes a bad angle going into turn 1, gets into the left rear of Alex Bowman, but instead of spinning Bowman out, he actually spins himself out and backs it hard into the wall. They were able to make some repairs, but he was pretty much off the pace for the rest of the day. Hamlin leads on the restart once again. Blaney challenges and takes 2nd from Eric Jones, and Keselowski also gets by the 20 for the 3rd position. Harvick starts trying to challenge Keselowski for 3rd. We have a great battle for 7th between Kyle Busch, Eric Almirola, and Joey Logano. We haven't really seen all day in this race. Then we have our 7th and final caution on lap 264 when Kyle Larson loses a right rear tire, probably from the damage that he received in the previous wreck. Hits the wall in turns 1 and 2 and spins out, and I actually think they retired the car at this point. So Kyle Larson's year of misery continues. Several drivers stay out and many come down pit road for at the very least 2 tires. There was a little bit of controversy here because Eric Jones initially looked like he violated the orange box at the entrance of pit road. It looked like he committed a pit road violation, but as it turned out, that was not the case. Apparently the rule is you have to have all 4 tires underneath of the box for it to be considered a pit road violation. So if you go onto pit road and all 4 tires are underneath the orange box and you come back out onto the track instead of going to pit road, that would be considered a pit lane violation. However, because his right side tires were not over the orange box, his left side tires were, but the rights weren't, meaning that he was straddling the box, he was allowed to come back out onto pit road and he wouldn't get a penalty for it. Yeah, NASCAR, it would probably help if you released the rule book to the public, because a lot of people feel like you make up rules as they go along, and This is not going to help matters. I mean, there were a lot of people that were calling you out on it. And of course, Steve O'Donnell, in his usual condescending douchebag way, was like, yeah, it's in the rules. Yeah, but we don't have access to the rule book, dude. So, you know what, we would actually, believe you a little bit more if you actually release the goddamn rule book to the public. Because a lot of us feel like you're spouting bullshit. Not exactly a good look for you to have. I mean, he wonders why a lot of people don't like him. He's a condescending douchebag. But anyways, all that aside, so several drivers stay out, including Kevin Harvick, who, by the way, even though I am not a fan of Harvick whatsoever, that paint job that they were sporting this week, that's one nice paint job. And I even referenced, if I can talk for a second, I even referenced that on Twitter. I was like, yeah, I'm not a fan of Harvick, but that is a beautiful paint scheme. Like, it really was. I was like, whoever designed that, that's a thumbs up. Maybe that's what Harvick needed to finally break through, was a nice paint job. It's hard to believe at this point in the season, he hadn't won a race yet. And at this point last year, when he won this race, this was his 6th win of the year last year. And this year, we're at this point, and he had 0 wins. Racing is weird, man. Hamlin actually managed to get by Jones for 2nd, which was the last thing Harvick wanted to see, considering that Hamlin seemed to have the best car at the late portion of this race. And of course, Hamlin is a pretty good driver here at New Hampshire, as he's won multiple times. Matt DiBenedetto up to 5th with 25 laps to go, and that's actually where he finished, so good job by DiBenedetto. Logano and Newman fighting hard for 7th, so proof positive that they did fix that engine issue, so actually great job by the Roush team to get that fixed. Kyle Busch nearly loses it in turn 2, trying to get around Logano for position, but actually hangs on to it. Hamlin continues to chase Harvick for the win. The gap is half a second with 10 laps to go, so they're kind of playing a little bit of cat and mouse. Hamlin was actually closing a little bit at a time, but with 6 laps to go, he actually got in a little bit too deep in turn 1 and actually slid up the track, and he actually lost 2/10 to Harvick. And a lot of people feel like that might have cost him the race, but he actually still had a shot at it. So also props to the lap cars for getting out of the way when they were able to. But now we come to the final lap, and this was quite eventful, to say the least. So Harvick with a little bit of deja vu, because this is actually the reverse role from last year. Last year, inside of 10 laps to go, Harvick was in chase mode against Kyle Busch, and he actually nudged Busch out of the way in turns 1 and 2 to take the win away. This time the opposite happens. Hamlin does the bump and run in turn 1. I'm thinking, oh shit. And but Harvick actually does hang on to it pretty well. I think he was kind of anticipating it, because considering he did it himself last year. So I think he actually anticipated it happening. So he was actually able to hang on to it pretty well, I thought. But Hamlin does get underneath him off of turn 2, but Harvick actually has a pretty good run on the high side and actually gets back in front of Hamlin. But a lot of us were thinking, oh, Hamlin's going to go ARCA braking and hit Harvick again going into turn 3, but I think Harvick anticipates that again and ducks low and goes low on the track, which I'm thinking, I don't know if that's a good idea, because that gives Hamlin the high side. Hamlin actually manages to get to Harvick's right rear, and they actually bang a little bit coming off of turn 4, but Harvick actually holds Hamlin at bay on this final lap, despite Hamlin on 2 occasions nearly getting there. And Harvick wins the Foxwoods Casino Resort 301 at New Hampshire, finally getting his first win of the year. So That's what, three? Is it like 3 of the last 4 races? We've had pretty damn good finishes. Of course, last week we had Kentucky. Even though the Kentucky race as a whole was not that good, the finish was definitely lit. And we got another great finish here. So, once again, NASCAR's Cup season this year has been loads better than 2018 by a country mile. So, give me 1 second here to open my notes on my computer back up. So I'm waiting for it to open up. Come on. You can do it. You can do it. Okay. Harvick, of course, wins the race. Denny Hamlin second. Harvick started 14th. Hamlin started 23rd. And Ryan Newman started 26th. But other than that, everyone else who started in the top 10 finished in the top 10. So track position, very important. Eric Jones, who initially thought they were going to be penalized, and he was actually mad at himself, but then they were relayed over the radio, no, you're not going to be penalized because you didn't actually violate the rules according to NASCAR. So he turned that into a 3rd place finish, which was pretty huge for him considering he's still trying to get into the playoff. Ryan Blaney with a much needed top 5. And of course, Matt DiBenedetto, I mean, he had a good weekend all around, honestly. He qualified 7th and finished 5th, so big deal for him. Martin Truex Jr. started 6th, finished 6th, so status quo for him. Ryan Newman started 26th in this race, finishes 7th, despite having an engine issue that they got fixed. Kyle Busch ends up 8th, despite all of his problems in the second half of the race. Joey Logano was very quiet, ended up 9th, and Brad Keselowski started from the pole, but ended up in the 10th position. So, the playoff picture with 6 races remaining until the playoff. 9 drivers have locked themselves in via victories. Kyle Busch still leads it with 4 wins, 27 playoff points. Martin Truex Jr. with 4 wins as well, 22 playoff points, although him and Logano I think are still pretty close in terms of overall points because there is a regular season championship and 15 playoff points that do go with that, so that's a pretty big deal. Right now it's looking like Kyle Busch and Martin Truex Jr. are the 2 guys to beat right now. And then of course you have Brad Keselowski and Joey Logano, and then Denny Hamlin, so Gibbs versus Penske is still right at the front of the field here. But now you have Kevin Harvick. I mean, he had plenty of points to make it in, honestly. And with the points that he had, you know, he would have been safe. Because even though he had 1 this year and he only had like 4 top 5s, he was still pretty consistent the entire year. And he had good cars in a lot of races, he just couldn't put it all together. At least until today. Chase Elliott, you know, he's had quite a few problems, mechanical issues mainly, in recent races, but he still came home. He still has the 1 win in his 7th. Kurt Busch, of course, won last week at Kentucky. He's 8th, and of course Alex Bowman had the big win at Chicagoland and finished in the 9th position. So Eric Almirola is 10th in the points, and he's the highest of those who have championship points, and of course he really helped himself out. Even though he didn't finish in the top 10, he did gain 18 stage points, so that was a pretty big deal. He's now 98 up on 16th. Ryan Blaney as well, good run for him. William Byron is still looking good. Kyle Larson, despite his troubles, is 13th. Then you have Eric Jones, Ryan Newman, and despite his troubles today, Clint Bowyer is 16th. So Jimmy Johnson is on the outside looking in, and 17 points is not exactly a small margin. So either needs to win or pick up the pace to get back into the playoff hunt. And he's tied with Daniel Suarez for 18th, so both of those guys on the outside looking in, but they still got a shot to get in. Menard and Stenhouse, they're 60 and 77 points out, so they basically, it's a must-win situation for them to get into the playoff, with 6 races remaining until that happens. As for my final rating for this race, like I said, it was a pretty solid race overall. Stage 2 sucked hardcore, man. I mean, that's what really drug this race down a little bit. Stage 2 with those cautions and just really no racing whatsoever in that stage. It was garbage. Stage 3 was definitely interesting, and that chase at the end with Hamlin trying to chase down Harvick and nearly doing so on the last lap. That extra lap actually came into play for once, because they added an extra lap onto the race to make it a 301 lap race, and it actually came into play in this race for once. So yeah, another great finish to a NASCAR race. Starting to see that more and more right now. I mean, this is what, like I said, 3 of the last 4 races have had pretty damn good finishes. So my final rating for the Foxwoods Casino Resort 301, I'll give it a 6 out of 10. Another solid race, and just continues the nice run that the Cup Series has had this year. Although I have the feeling that won't be the case next week, because the Cup Series is going to Pocono for the second time. It's only been a month and a half, and we're going back to Pocono. And then they have Watkins Glen, which is a race I'm looking forward to, and then Michigan after that. So to the next 3 races, I'm not expecting a whole lot. My expectations are low as fuck for Pocono and Michigan in the next 3 weeks. And Pocono's next week. God help us all. But that'll do it for today's review. Thank you very much for watching The Fuel, and I will see you next time. Credits, please. Well, that is all for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. Be sure to rate, comment, favorite, like, and subscribe to my channels here on YouTube.com and over on BitChute.com. If you would like to sponsor my channel, go to my channel page at subscribestar.com. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, this is the PackerMan, signing out. Have a good one.